Hi and welcome to today's interview. I'm privileged to have with me today Alex Kiroi-Bogatyreva. Is that okay? But before we get started, just want to remind everybody to go and visit the socialblueprint.org.au to see what's going on in the community and any upcoming events and other resources that are being offered. So, Alex, thank you and welcome.
It's nice to be here.
Alex, you're a rhythmic gymnast, and I'll get to what that means and what's involved in that. I just want to go back a little bit to understand your background and where you came from. So you're born in New Zealand.
Yes.
Is there any significance of New Zealand in terms of was there family living there, or was it?
My family moved when the USSR broke apart in the 90s, and they moved to New Zealand then.
Okay.
And I lived there for 2-3 years and then moved to Australia because there's more opportunities for family, parents, everything. And since then I've been here and in Europe my whole life.
Okay. Wow. And so your parents must have an amazing journey and story of their own, I imagine.
Yes, that's an interview for another time.
Yes. And so you came to Melbourne, and at some point in time, is it just you, any siblings?
No siblings.
Okay. And at some point in time, you take up an interest in gymnastics. So before we get down that path, you can tell by this beautiful green and gold that Alex is a Commonwealth, Olympic, Maccabiah Rhythmic gymnast, medal winner in all of those events, in all of those occasions. Tell us a bit about how did you start with gymnastics?
So I started when I was around 2. Just gymnastics for everyone. It's good for development. It's good as a child to try new things. Get the energy out. And when I was 5, because rhythmic gymnastics is a very European sport, my parents put me into rhythmic gymnastics. For girls to have nice legs, to be beautiful, gracious. And at around 11 years of age, I went to my first international competition in Spain, and I won it. And it was a big surprise for my whole family. We didn't know how serious things were. And I specifically remember winning a kettle as my gold medal.
As an 11-year-old.
Yes, and the kettle wasn't even, it had the charge thing for Europe.
Europe.
Not for Australia.
Okay.
So we came home and gave it to my grandparents, and I don't know what they're doing with it now. But since 11 years of age, that's when I decided myself, not through my family, but me, that I want to continue this sport, and I think I have a good chance of, medaling in the future, and that's how my story started.
So were your parents into sport before you were born?
My mum was a professional ballroom dancer in New Zealand, and unfortunately her hip swing movements didn't pass on to me. But I think the determination and passion for what I do definitely came through everyone in my family.
So when you start gymnastics, I mean, I know with my own kids, in terms of starting at gymnastics schools, it's pretty broad in terms of what it is you're learning. And I imagine as a 2 and 5-year-old, it's very basic and broad, and there's probably a little bit of dance in there, a little bit of ballet, if you could call it at that point. Were you doing all those things?
Everything possible. I did it when I was 2.
Wow.
Because I was such an energetic child, my mum just shoved me in there. I honestly don't remember anything. I just remember doing dance and ballet. But I think it's really beneficial for children to do any sport. It doesn't have to be elite. I think it's good for them for the future, to learn everything and find their own pathway. And you do everything when you're little. And then you have to choose one.
Yes, and then suddenly, and in your case, it sounds like it was earlier than most to be competing internationally at 11.
Yep.
Were you aware at 11 of the pressure of international competition?
At 11 years old, I don't think kids are aware of pressure.
Mm.
I don't think they understand the concept of that.
Yeah.
But I do remember being extremely nervous the day before. I had an atrocious training, and my coach was having a good long chat with me, trying to prepare me for the competition.
Yeah.
But the pressure only started when I was around 16 years old.
Okay, get to that in a second. So at this point, you're a student at King David? Is that
I'm
right?
studying law at Monash University.
No, at that stage.
Yes,
yeah,
at
you were
that
at King
stage,
David.
I was at King David for my whole life, year 3 to year 12.
So were there friends who were doing gymnastics or that knew about gymnastics? Were you feeling different at that point?
To be honest, that was so many years ago, I don't remember.
Okay.
But all my friends actually stemmed from rhythmic gymnastics, I would say. So now my closest friend, who I met when I was 5, 6, in rhythmic gymnastics, she's my best friend still till till this day.
That's amazing. Okay, so at school, in terms of training, I mean, if you were already ready to compete internationally at 11, I'm gathering that training is not just it's not just a, hour and a half after school one day.
I wish.
Yeah. So, I mean, as young, forget 11, even at 5 and 6, what was the level of training at that point?
When you're younger, it's still for fun.
Yeah.
Until you choose the elite pathway, it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
So I think it only started after 11 years of age. It was, 4-hour training each day, and then it progressed to morning and evening training, so 7 hours per day. And then around 16 years old, there was 8-hour training days. And then before Olympics, it got to 10 to 11 training hour days.
So when you're at school, how do you balance that?
I had an extreme passion for the sport. And my family's also very academic. Yeah. And I had to do and be good at both. I had no option.
I'm gathering by the fact that you've gone on to start studying law that, it wasn't study falls by the wayside while you focus on the rhythmic gymnastics. So you're managing to balance both as a 16-year-old. That's pretty intense, I imagine.
I have to give a big credit to the King David School. They allowed me to, push some exams or, give in my homework a day later than other students because I was training. After school, I wouldn't come home to sit and study. I would come home to a 6-hour training session and finish at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
So I'm very thankful to all my teachers and the principal, Mark Light, for giving me this opportunity because in the end it did pay off, both academically and through sport.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a hard balance, but I guess you don't know any different.
No, it's my way of life.
Yeah. So from 11, you're competing internationally. During this time, and I'll get to COVID in a minute because that would have changed everything, I imagine. Were you still training in Melbourne?
At 11 years of age?
No, COVID, how old were you in
COVID? I was 19-ish.
Okay,
yes.
So the years leading up to that, so sort of 16 to 19, when you're in the thick of competing internationally, were you still training pretty much in Melbourne?
I was actually based here and in Europe, Russia countries.
Okay,
because that's where rhythmic gymnastics was built. It's where it was created, and that's where I was spending. Example for year 9, I spent the whole of year 9 in Russia.
Wow. And
I did my year 9 exams overseas. That was very tricky to sit there speaking Russian to my coach and then try to type an exam in English. It's very different.
Working both sides of the brain.
But since I was younger, I started traveling to Europe to get more trainings. They have better facilities, better coaching, better environment for gymnastics, and that's where it all started.
Because I imagine on that the coaching, the level of coaching or the level of expertise just doesn't compare here to overseas.
Unfortunately, in Australia, it's not. It's not a very developed sport, rhythmic gymnastics in particular, and it's 99% self-funded as well. So we have to find our own ways to become the athlete we want to be.
Okay. And that must be pretty challenging growing up, spending year 9, year 10, they're tough years, particularly I think as a female. That must be tough, spending that much time away from home and trying to maintain friendships.
It was very hard, but I look back on it and I'm very grateful for all the challenges I've gone through. I'm thankful to my friends who stuck by me because it just shows they're the ones that care and they matter. And it was, I think because I wasn't at school as much as other children, I might have not experienced the hardships that females face at school. Yes. And I had my different challenges in sport at that time.
Okay. So you're spending a lot of time overseas with your parents or alone?
Alone. My whole life I've been alone overseas since a little girl.
That's incredible. I guess to ask you the question, how is that for you? You wouldn't know any different, but it must have been a real adjustment at the beginning.
At the beginning it was hard because I didn't have my mum and my dad there with me. But it makes you independent and it teaches you valuable life lessons.
Incredibly independent. I can actually only imagine. Is there, if you travel overseas as, let's say, as a 16, 17-year-old, or if you're living overseas to train, is somebody there taking you under their wing? Are you part of a team environment?
No team. I moved in with my coach from overseas back then. She was my coach guiding me, and I lived in her house. So it was just me and my coach at home, and then at training, just me and my coach. So it's a very
You better like your coach.
I think it's a vice versa situation as well.
Yes.
But yeah, it was a very difficult time, you know, always spending time together, and she became my second mom.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And that's how it worked.
And has your coach changed over the years since then? At what point do you say, we're done, I've gone as far as I can with you, or for other reasons, changing coaches?
There's a lot of reasons. Unfortunately, there were big issues between myself and the coach.
Okay.
And also the political situation in Russia, that made a very big effect, and it's very risky to stay there, and I decided for my safety and to continue my sport, it's better off to change environments.
Okay, so where did you go to from there?
In 2021, I went to Russia, then everything happened with all the wars happening, and
that must have been incredibly emotional, particularly for your parents, watching.
I think they were shocked because no one knew what to do at that point. And I was just stranded alone over there. They couldn't just comfort me or, you know, quickly fly me to a different country. It takes time to book. It takes time to do everything. But I'm very thankful to Azerbaijan. They took me under their wing. The head coach, Mariana, she did everything in her power to help me make the Olympics. And
how did you make contact? I mean, there's obviously different relationships being built at this time. But
so Azerbaijan has always had the best, now I can say, facilities for rhythmic gymnastics.
Okay.
And I also met the Azerbaijani team at the World Championships in 2021, Kitakyushu, and they invited me for a training camp, which turned into a 3-year training camp, and I was the longest ever international gymnast they had.
Wow. Okay.
And I became, their own as well.
Yes. You really, I think lots of countries are going to proclaim you as theirs. So in terms of COVID, as a point in time, if I relate it back to what was going on probably in most countries, but I know of Melbourne, Australia, kids doing online school, people working from home, the limitations were pretty expansive. What did it mean for you in terms of A, where you were, B, how you can train?
It's a very interesting question because we were online in 2020 because of COVID, and I moved out to my grandparents' house, which is quite far away from here. Yeah. And
so you would have been year 11 or year 12?
I was year 12, finishing year 12. And they have a much bigger house compared to where we lived in St Kilda. And to continue my training, I practically changed their whole garage into a small gymnastics venue. And I lived without my parents the entire year just to be able to train online with my coaches.
So training online, I mean, that makes sense if you're learning the piano maybe, or how are you training online? So you've set the garage up to be your space.
Yep.
And they're watching you, or how does it work?
I had 4-hour, 5-hour training sessions online. Unfortunately, the roof is very limiting for rhythmic gymnastics because we end up throwing hundreds of meters up.
Yes.
So we had to go outside, take the camera outside with us and practice our throws outside where we could.
Wow.
It was very challenging, and at the same time, I did learn a lot and I did improve my weaknesses in the sport. So it had its pluses and minuses.
So while you say that, digressing a little bit, in terms of rhythmic gymnastics, and for those people, I've made an assumption that people know exactly what's involved in the sport. Tell us a little bit about what's involved in the different apparatus and why that's different to other types of gymnastics.
So the most asked question I get is, can you do a backflip? And I just walk away usually because that means they don't know what rhythmic gymnastics is.
Yeah.
So rhythmic gymnastics is different to artistic gymnastics, which use beams, floor, and they flip and they do all the twists and everything. Rhythmic gymnastics is hoop, ball, clubs, and ribbon. They're the 4 apparatuses you do at a senior age. And it's all about elegant grace, flexibility, and the strength as well.
And are most people equally apt in all those 4 apparatus, or do you find that there's a strength in one over the other, or more a weakness in one?
Because we're not like artistic gymnastics where you can focus on one apparatus and, I forgot the name in English, specialize.
Yep.
We have to do all 4. You have no choice. You have to compete all 4 at all events, all competitions, Olympics, doesn't matter. So you have to be good at all of them. You can't just, be good at hoop and then have a bad score for ball and then in the rating you're gone.
Yeah, it's going to mess with your scores. Okay. So bringing us back now to the garage gives a bit more of a visual, because that's what I was visualising, thinking you need space. I mean, forget height. I imagine you need space.
You need a lot of space in rhythmic gymnastics because we do a lot of throwing with the hoop, ball and clubs and ribbon. You stand there spiralling the ribbon and it takes up a lot of area, same as the hoop.
Yeah.
So it was very difficult to manoeuvre, but it is what it is, and you had to make do of the situation that you had.
And I imagine everybody's in the same situation across the world at this point?
No. Australia's lockdown was the harshest compared to other countries, and all the gymnasts I talked to, they're like, no, we train fine.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, well, I was in my grandparents' garage most of the year.
So how did that make you feel in terms of, am I falling behind? Am I keeping up with the level I should be at?
You definitely have those thoughts. They're the negative thoughts that come into your mind, but you have to focus on what you can do and what you can change to be able to get to your goal.
Yeah.
So you have to reframe your mindset to get where you want to get.
So your first competition coming out of COVID, major competition, how did you perform?
I was a bit shaky because you don't do any competitions while you're training in a garage.
Yeah.
So you need the practice of competition practice, the stress, the nervousness to get that out of your system.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure I was quite shaky. But then I did heaps of competitions that year in the lead up to Tokyo to prepare myself and get myself ready.
Yeah. So I'll get to Tokyo in a second. So you've competed at 2 Commonwealth Games. The one in Australia,
wow.
Was that more special because it was home territory, or less special because it didn't feel as, I'm going to say, exciting to be travelling to, whatever countries you might have otherwise travelled to?
They're special, both special for different reasons. One is because I finally got the gold medal that I wanted to, and one was because I was only first year senior. I was 15 years old, the youngest on the team, and my teammates were 23 and 25. Okay. So I was the very little baby of the team, and going into qualifications for Commonwealth Games, I knew I had the potential to get the spot, but I'm only first year. I had no experience of big competitions, of big arenas, 8,000 people sitting there looking at me. Yeah. So that was a very memorable competition for me, qualifiers and making Commonwealth Games. And then when it came to being in Gold Coast, in Australia, with a home crowd, with Chris Hemsworth sitting there.
That makes it all worthwhile.
That made a very big deal. And I just remember the roaring arena and the ground shaking when everyone's just cheering for you. And then the ultimate silence when your score's coming up and they're comparing it to all the other athletes. It's an incredible feeling, and it's going to last a lifetime.
Because I can only say, as a spectator and only really through TV for rhythmic gymnastics, that anticipation and watching the competitors' face as they're waiting for the scores and watching the elation or the disappointment and not really ever understanding as a layperson why a score might be slightly lower or slightly higher. That must be that the anticipation must be pretty huge.
Rhythmic gymnastics is a very subjective sport, so you don't know where the scoring will be on the day.
Yes.
Let's just put it at that.
Okay.
But if you do your job to your best ability, you should be able to pull through.
Okay, so how did that compare for you from a feeling perspective to Birmingham?
Birmingham, I was one of the most experienced athletes there. Yeah. So now I had the pressure of, is she going to get the gold? Yeah. Especially after Tokyo. Yeah. 2022 Commonwealth Games came straight away. And it was pressure from me of proving to myself and the world who I am. Yes. And it was pressure of me being the most experienced athlete, as the commentators kept saying every single routine.
So it's almost better and easier going in as the baby with no expectations.
It helped in that situation in 2018, going with no expectations, not knowing where I'll be placed, how everyone's going, just going out there to do my job. Yes. But as an experienced athlete, you have to get used to the pressure. Yeah. You either crack or you sink or swim.
Yeah. So you've made reference to Tokyo. Do you want to elaborate? That was quite controversial for you and I imagine a really difficult time. What happened?
So I was always number one in rhythmic gymnastics my entire life as a senior. athlete. I have never come second in a competition to the athlete that went to the Olympics. So I have always beaten her every single competition before and after the Olympics. And at our qualification event, there was alleged corruption and match fixing, which cost me my ticket. We had a law case in Switzerland, and many judges were sanctioned. 2 judges were sanctioned. Oceania Union Gymnastics was sanctioned. National Federation was sanctioned, and many other people, and the CEO. However, this was all done, the law case was done after the Olympic ticket was gone, and my ticket to Tokyo was in Tokyo already.
Wow. So how did you deal with it? I imagine
Back then, I'd say I probably didn't.
Yeah.
But now it made me who I am today.
Yeah.
Very determined, goal-driven, and passionate about my sport now, even more. It was a very hard time for me and my family. It broke us all down completely.
Yeah.
You know, being number 1 athlete, Olympics being your number 1 goal, and not going there. So
what about the relationship with the person who took your spot?
There is none.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Did you have one before that?
Rhythmic gymnastics is a female-based sport.
Yes.
And all the stories that you may hear of what women do to each other in the back, unfortunately, that some athletes think that's the way to go, and that's how you should win. That's not how I was raised, and I don't think it's the correct approach to sport. Everyone is there doing their job. It's competitive, you versus yourself, and the results follow.
Yeah.
You do not have to affect other people's competition.
It's funny, it was one of those things that I almost think of it as a fun fact that rhythmic gymnastics is female-based, and only females compete in it. And that's obviously telling in, you know, the effects that you're talking about there. It's an interesting thought, though. Why do you think it is that, are there not males that are interested in it, or?
Actually, there are rhythmic gymnastics around the world which have started including men.
Okay.
In Japan, it's very different rhythmic gymnastics. So they include our apparatuses with a little bit of flipping. So they make it more masculine.
Okay.
But then there's Spain who do exactly the same as us. They wear the leotards, they do hoop ball clubs and ribbon. And I think it's good for the, you know, development of the sport, because in the Olympics you have to have women and men to do a sport. It's good for that approach, and they do what they want to do.
Yeah. So at European Championships this year, you qualified for Paris. I can only imagine the sense of relief or elation.
The qualification was extremely hard.
Okay.
Going into what should have been my second Olympics, that pressure from me again to, you know, make it or break it, it was really there, and I didn't want to let anyone down. And, you know, 10 to 11 hours of training, the psychological preparation that I did with my sports psychologist was absolutely insane. To not get all those thoughts stuck in your head, and to go out and do a clean routine, because if I had a small error, my Olympic quota would be gone completely.
Okay.
One small mistake and your whole life changes once again. But I'm thankful to everyone who supported me, all the Azerbaijani coaches, my family, sports psychologist. We made it through. And I just remember there at the end standing with my coaches, waiting for my score to come up, and in comparison to the other girls. And once it did, everyone just burst out crying. I remember the first person I called was my mum, and she was shocked. Everyone was shocked that I'm finally going to Olympics.
So you touched on the sports psychologist, and I'm interested. I understand the need for one. Has that person, he? I imagine he played a huge role post the Tokyo Olympics.
I've gone through multiple sports psychologists to find the one that works for me. And yes, at the time, the sports psychologist that I did have leading up to Tokyo and after Tokyo did help me a lot to get through the situation that I was in. However, moving countries and trying to find what works best for me, I've changed a couple, and now I'm with a different male sports psychologist, and I'm very grateful because he he focuses on giving you techniques and making sure that you actually practice them, not just, sitting there talking through your issues. It's not the approach that I need. I actually need to know what I need to do to block off these negative thoughts or whatever is happening. So we've worked a lot with him.
And as a matter of interest, what happens, the athlete that went to the Tokyo Olympics, did she win any medals?
No.
Okay. I was going to ask what would have happened.
And she didn't win any medals at Commonwealth Games either, and our team got a silver medal because of some of the performances we had.
So that must sit a little bit more comfortably with you that she didn't go out well.
I'm not a jealous type. I'm not an angry type. I'm angry at the situation.
Yeah.
I'm angry at the people that cost me my Olympic license.
Yeah.
And maybe if she did have something behind it, it's on her, and everything will be seen from above.
Fair enough. And you got to Paris. Tell me about Paris. From a couple of perspectives. Did you feel safe?
I didn't. And I didn't leave the village once.
Okay.
Being a Jew.
Yeah, I should clarify. Australian and Jewish were the two
very risky ones. I'm very close with the Israeli national team. The girl who went, I trained with her a couple of times in Israel, and she's one of my closest friends, and she's amazing, Dasha Tamanov. And unfortunately, the Israeli team couldn't always wear their uniform. They didn't have flags up in their, buildings, and it was just really sad to see how an Olympic sport, which shouldn't be in politics, is so affected by everything that happens in the world.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't leave the village once.
Do you think that tainted your experience a little bit, that fear and not being able to leave the village?
It was something that you had to think about every day. But I was also there for the Olympics to enjoy it because I finally made it. Yeah. So I had to, think about the goods while thinking about my safety as well.
Yes. And you touched on just then the friendships with the other competitors. And I imagine, particularly as you've said, you've trained with international teams as well. How are the friendships, and I guess maybe the flip side of the negative, we were talking about the negatives of the female sport, the flip side of the positives, are there friendships that have been born out of the sport and that
there's many, and I think I get along with those girls that aren't jealous or they're on the same page as me with values and how sport should be. And I'm a very social person. I love talking to other people. I love talking to other athletes, other sports, seeing what they're doing. And it was pretty much the whole time I was in the village, I was constantly with other people apart from the Australian team, because we were always just together. We were in the Olympics together. We knew each other's stories. They knew how I qualified for Paris and what happened in Tokyo. One of them I trained 3 years in Azerbaijan with, and we both qualified to Paris together. So it's just very special, and these connections last a lifetime, and we're still messaging till this day.
And I imagine, whilst you talked about friends that you've kept from school who have stood by you, there's only a limited amount, or to a point, that they can understand on a daily basis what you go through mentally and physically, and to be able to share that with other athletes.
It's much easier because they can relate to it, but at the same time, no one goes through what I went through for Tokyo, and I don't go through what they went through to qualify for Paris, for example. But we understand what sport is like in the world, and we just support each other as much as we can. So amongst all this, going back 3 years, you competed at Maccabiah. And thinking about it, and you've referenced it, that it's not a sport that is huge in Australia. So you go as an Australian, but the level of competition, was it what you expected it to be? Was it harder? Was it... I expected it to be how it was, because the last Tokyo Olympic champion was from Israel for rhythmic gymnastics. Okay, so gave you an insight. Their rhythmic gymnastics school is very, very strong. And I expected it to be a tough competition, and I trained there for a bit prior to Maccabiah. I trained there afterwards for a couple of times as well because of their training program. Their head coach is absolutely amazing, and I just love being in Israel anytime I can. And Maccabiah was just such a fantastic experience, being with other Jews to celebrate our wins and each talking to each other, sharing our values, and all being on the same page. Yeah, there must be something very special. I mean, I know for other sports that's the case, but particularly in your sport, which I don't imagine attracts so many Jews. It's not like
going with a team from Australia to play tennis, which might be something you do as a hobby.
Yeah.
This is something you're doing on a serious level, on an elite level. It must be pretty special being surrounded by other Jewish people in the same situation.
It was a fantastic event, and just being able to share our traditions and sit there, you know, on a competition day. It was Friday, so we were just having Shabbos all together, and I think it's just fabulous to be able to have these connections and this community that you can, you know, be safe in.
Yeah. And have you been involved with Maccabi or their support for you?
Many years. I won many awards. They've helped me with some scholarships, and Maccabi has always been there to support me since I was a little girl.
Amazing. They had the foresight to see where you were heading clearly. In terms of the sport and the toll that it takes on your body, every sport in some way, shape or form has an impact on the body. What about you, and what about rhythmic gymnastics? What's common in terms of injury, and what have you endured?
I personally think rhythmic gymnastics is one of the biggest toll on your body sports you can have in terms of the repercussions after sport.
Right.
These aren't injuries where it's like you do a flip, you break your bone, and then you come back in a couple months. These are injuries where your disc flies out and then you'll have issues for the rest of your life with back pains, or in my case, hip pains, ankle pains, knee pains. So it's a very difficult sport, and that's why the longevity in rhythmic gymnastics is not big at all.
What's the age?
Usually we retire around 21, 22.
Oh, you're doing well. Okay.
Yeah,
22.
I'm a, they say in Russian, a pensioner, so I'm like, you know, I should be getting my money, you know, walking with a stick and everything. But there was an athlete at the Olympics who was 30 years old, and the audience completely respected her because that is a very rare image to see.
Yeah, I imagine. So are you fit and healthy?
I think the long pause said it all.
Yes.
But I'm working on it currently with Victorian Institute of Sport. All the doctors there are fantastic. I'm constantly getting checkups, you know, working on what my body needs, and it may take time, but
Is there the network and the support here in Melbourne for that sort of thing at the right level that you need?
Victorian Institute of Sport does that.
Yeah.
They supported me after Tokyo all the way to Paris, and clearly it was the right choice.
Yeah.
And without the doctor that I see there and my physiotherapist, who was also at the Olympic Games, which is such a fantastic thing to have, I probably would be even more broken. So they really quickly, I tell them what's wrong, they fix me up within a day or two, and then we come back and visit this issue when I have time.
Okay. The quick fix versus the hard work. Yes, versus the hard work. So what does the future look like for you now? You're 22, you're still competing?
I'm currently in my recovery mode, so thinking about how everything's going, my body, have to really fix that up at the moment.
Did you have a break? Did you have a break after Paris where you literally stopped?
Yes, so the week I came back, I'll be brutally honest, I slept 16 hours a day for a week. I was, you know, waking up at 7 in the morning for trainings and doing 10-hour training load days. It really takes a physical and mental toll on your body. So I just came home, and I think I was just in my room sleeping 16 hours a day. I just remember me and my mom were like, whoa, this is so much. But it's what my body needed for the time. And then after that, I was like, okay, law, let's get this started. Work, let's get this started. Recovery from my body, let's get this going. And now I have a clear plan of what I want to do. Okay,
so moving forward, so you're in recovery mode now. What next? What happens?
So I'm my career-focused base at the moment, and I really want to, how do I say this, go into my law pathway, and I'm really excited, especially after 2021, you know, having a law case in Switzerland. It really grew my passion for law, especially sports law, and I'm still in touch with my sports lawyer who helped out. And I think it's just something that I can look into the future.
So it might be your area that you end up.
Maybe. We'll see how it goes. I also coach at the moment. And I enjoy sharing my knowledge so much because I've been to so many different countries. I've been to Olympics, Commonwealth Games. I love being able to show firsthand what I can do and explain it from my side. Not many coaches in Australia can explain the mistakes that girls are making. So because I myself have done everything possible, I can tell them, do this, do that. And
so who are you coaching?
I'm coaching girls that are going into their first year senior.
Okay.
So they're transitioning from junior to senior, so it's a big step for them.
Yes.
And they've known me since I was a junior, and they were like little babies starting the sport.
Okay.
So they know my story, they know everything, and they have a huge respect for me, and it goes the same way for them. I really respect them and their families, and we just have such a great connection in the gym. They love me, and I can also be very strict with them at the same time, and they appreciate it.
Okay. So does that mean, do you think that the sport's growing in Australia?
Not enough. And I don't, currently how it's going, it's going to be hard for rhythmic gymnastics to grow. It's just not popular for some reason. It's just not something that people want to do straight away.
And it must be difficult, I guess, if you go down the path of becoming serious about it, to know that really there's so much time that needs to be spent overseas. That's not going to be for everybody. Not
everyone, and unfortunately, if you're not from a stable financial background, it's going to be really hard for you to.
If it's self-funded, particularly,
it's going to be really hard for you in the future.
Is there sponsorship in other countries, or is it just Australia that's?
In other countries, you get paid for training.
We've got a way to catch up.
That's why I have a lot of respect from other athletes and coaches from around the world, because I was training with girls, and I would be the most hardworking person on the floor, coming in first, leaving last,
and you're getting the least for it.
Yep, least for it. But they respected me because they knew what my goal was, and I was willing to do everything to get there.
And your work ethic. And it's clearly paid off. So your work ethic now gets thrown towards law and your studies. What year are you in?
So because I did part-time, I've done a lot of my electives and a couple of law subjects. Unfortunately, Monash didn't offer all the law subjects online, so I had to stop at one point and go on to electives. Okay. Currently, I'm on like second year law subjects, but I've done more subjects than other people in second year. It's a bit of a tricky one there. Yes. But I'll definitely amp it up from next year or whenever I choose to.
Yes, and you're finding the balance with everything at the moment.
It's just enough, I have my work, I have my law, and I'm going into my law career work areas as well. So I think it's a good balance for the moment.
And in terms of, you referenced before, and the Maccabiah support, the broader Jewish community, have they been supportive of your journey?
Absolutely. And I think just embracing the values with all my friends and family has been a long journey. It's been amazing, starting from the King David School and now to all my friends being Jewish. Yes. We have supported each other no matter what, no matter when or where, and just always standing by one another when times get tough in sport and outside of sport, like what's happening now. It's been really nice to have them.
Good. Well, I think that brings us to an end. There's so many more things that I would love to ask you, but time's going to get the better of us. But thank you. It's been so interesting to hear your story, and you should be incredibly, incredibly proud of your journey and your values and the hard work. It's really admirable, and to hear and to think of what you've achieved at the age, or by the age of 22, is pretty inspiring and impressive. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And lovely to talk to you.
Likewise.